students. It's me again, Teacher D. So today we are going to talk about one of the methods of teaching language arts, which is called the total physical response method. So before we formally start, let's have an activity first. So all you need to do is to act out the different words. So the first one is clap. Very good. Next, jump. Very good. Next, touch your nose. Very good. Thank you for participating, class. So what we did is an example of a total physical response method. So what is total physical response method? So total physical response method is a language teaching method built around the coordination of speech and actions. So students respond using physical movements to the orders given by the teacher. So in total physical response method, learning is much more efficient and active participation is more complete. So the total physical response method is a way of teaching language by combining speech with physical actions. So the teacher gives commands and student responds by acting or moving their bodies according to the instructions. So just like what we did earlier. So I said, clap your hands, and then you clap your hands. So that is an example of a total physical response. So this method makes learning faster and more engaging because students are actively involved. So the total physical response method was introduced by James Asher. So James Asher focused on a concept that babies don't learn comprehension by memorizing lists, but they learn by listening and then try to speak the words which they listen. So the total physical response method was created by James Asher, so who believed that babies learn language not by memorizing words but by listening to others and then trying to speak. So his idea is that understanding comes first through listening, and speaking follows naturally. So just like how babies learn to talk by hearing and then imitating. So what are the basic principles in total physical response method? So there are three basic principles in total physical response method. So the first one is understanding the spoken language before developing the skills of speaking. So in these principles, this means that learners should first focus on comprehending what they hear before they try to speak. So by listening and understanding the language, students build a strong foundation, making them easier to express themselves. So the second one is imperatives are the main structures to transfer or communicate information. So this means that the teaching method primarily uses commands or imperatives to convey information. For example, the teacher might say, stand up, touch your nose. So, and students respond physically. So this direct way of communicating helps students connect words into actions. So the last principle is the students is not forced to speak, but allowed to spontaneously begin to speak when the students feel comfortable and confident in understanding and producing the expressions. So this principle emphasizes that students should not be pressured to talk before they are ready. Instead, they should feel free to start speaking when they feel confident in their understanding of the language. So what are the objectives in total physical response method? So there are three objectives in total physical response method. The first one is teaching oral proficiency at the beginning level. So the goal of these objectives is to help students develop their speaking skills from the very start of their language learning journey. So by focusing on oral proficiency, students learn to communicate effectively in everyday situation using simple vocabulary and phrases. So the second one is using imperative drills in the classroom. Less stress, more comfortable. So these objectives involve using a command-based exercises to create a relaxed and enjoyable learning environment. So by giving students a clear instructions like jump, clap, so they can practice the language without the pressure of forming complex sentences. So this approach helps students feel more at ease as they learn. The last one is using comprehension as a means of speaking. So these objectives emphasizes the importance of understanding language as a foundation of speaking. So students first focus on listening and comprehending what they hear before attempting to speak. So this helps ensure that when they do start to talk, so they are using language correctly and confidently based on what they have understood. So what are the characteristics of a total physical response method? So there are four characteristics in total physical response method. So the first one is teacher uses commands most of the time. So communication with the students. So in total physical response method, the teacher primarily gives commands or instruction to guide students in their learning. So this focus on command-based communication helps students learn to associate words with actions. So making the learning experience more dynamic and engaging. So the second one is students constantly hear the teacher's orders. So in this way, so they become familiar with the sounds. So as students repeatedly hear the teacher's commands, so they become accustomed to the sounds and pronunciation of the language. So this constant exposure helps improve their listening skills and builds a foundation for understanding spoken language, so which is crucial for effective communication. So the third one is the class activities favor the development of listening, vocabulary, and speech. So activities in a total physical response classroom are designed to enhance various language skills simultaneously. So through interactive tasks, students practice learning to commands, learning new vocabulary through context, and engage in speech when they feel ready. So it creating a holistic approach to language learning. So the last one is the method respects the student's initial silence or the silent period. So the total physical response method emphasizes that new learners often go through a silent period where they may not speak much. So this is completely normal. So as they are processing and internalizing the language, so the method respects this phase by allowing students to observe and listen without pressure to speak until they feel comfortable and ready to do so. So these characteristics in total physical response method create a supportive and effective learning environment that promotes language acquisition through active participation and comprehension.
How is total physical response used in the classroom? So first, the teacher and students take the role similar to parents and child. So in the total physical response, the teacher gives commands like a parent, teaching their child how to do something. So the students act like a children, listen and follow the instructions. So this method mimics how we naturally learn our first language at home by hearing commands and responding with actions before learning to speak, right? So for example, the teacher says, touch your head. and the students respond by touching their heads, just like a child would follow a parent's instruction. Second, students must respond physically. So instead of just listening, students physically act out the instructions given by the teacher. So this helps them to understand and remember the words better because they are connecting the language to an action. So for example, the teacher says jump and the students respond by jumping. So in this way, they connect the word jump with the physical action of jumping. Correct? So for the third one, the activity can be a simple or more complex games. So total physical response activities can range from very basic instructions to more complicated games. So they can start with simple tasks like pointing to an object and evolve into complex activities such as role playing or following a series of instructions in a game. So for example, an activity might be a teacher saying stand up and sit down, while a more complex game would involve the teacher giving several commands like touch your nose, clap your hands, and spin around. So with the students following the same sequence. Next, what are the advantages and limits of the total physical response? First, let's tackle the advantages. First, students enjoy spending time. So, total physical response activities are fun and interactive, which keeps students engaged. Since students are physically active, it breaks the monotony of traditional lessons and also helps create a positive learning environment. So for example, your students enjoy games like Simon Says or action-based stories where they follow the teacher's commands, making the class feel like a playtime rather than straight learning, right? Second, total physical response activities are simple. So, the commands and activities used in total physical response are straightforward, making it easy for both teachers and students to follow. So, also there's no need for it to be complex instructions, which helps students focus on understanding the language. So, for example, the commands like stand up, run in place, or touch your ears are easy for students to follow without any traditional explanation. Third advantages, total physical response requires no skills and works well in classes. So, total physical response doesn't require students to have a prior skills or knowledge to participate. So, it's suitable for learners at any level, specifically beginners, and works well in different classroom settings, even with a large group of students. So for example, whether it's a class of 10 or 30 students, total physical response works because everyone can participate by simply listening and also moving, with no special skills required. Fourth advantages. It's good for kinesthetic students. So kinesthetics learners who learn best through movement and also physical activity. So they benefit the most from the total physical response. It allows them to engage physically, which helps them retain information more effectively. So for example, students who find it hard to sit still during traditional lessons may excel in total physical response where they get to move around as part of the learning process. Now let's proceed to the limits of physical response. So first limits, it's difficult to teach the abstract content. So total physical response is effective for teaching concrete, action-based language but becomes challenging when teaching abstract concepts like freedom or justice, where no physical action is directly linked to the word. So for example, you can easily act out and open the door, but not understanding or thinking, making it harder to use. Typical or total physical response for these types of lessons, right? So for the second limits, teachers have to do obvious actions carefully. So teachers needs to ensure that their physical action match the language they are teaching. So if the actions are unclear or confusing, students might misunderstand the meaning of the command. So for example, if the teacher says one, but the teachers walk slowly, students might get confused about what the word run is, what the word one really means, right? So teachers have to be mindful of their actions to avoid mixed signals. Third limit, total physical response has been an experimental model with voluntary students. So TPR is still seen as an experimental method in some educational settings. It has been mostly tested with volunteer students in research rather than being a widely established approach in mainstream education. So, for example, while total physical response has shown promise in some studies, it hasn't been universally adopted as a primary teaching method in all schools. So, fourth limit, total physical response is especially effective in the beginning levels of the language. So TPR is great for beginners because it focuses on basic commands and vocabulary. But as students advance, it becomes less effective since it doesn't target more complex language, structure, or abstract concepts. So for example, it is easy to teach a beginner to follow commands like sit down, or run. But as they reach higher levels, they need more grammar and language instruction beyond what total physical response offers.
Next is the procedure. The majority of class time in TPR lesson is spent during drills, which the instructor gives commands using the imperative mood. Students respond to this command with physical action. In total physical response lessons, most of the class time is dedicated to practice through drills. During these drills, the teacher gives command using the imperative mood. Using the command are direct instructions like stand up or turn around. Students don't respond by speaking, they respond by performing the physical action described by the teacher. This allows students to learn language in an active, engaging way, associating words with specific movements, which helps reinforcing their understanding. Initially, students learn the meaning of the commands they hear by direct observation. After they learn the meaning of the words in these commands, the teacher issues commands that know those combination of words of the students have learned. At the beginning of total physical response lessons, students understand the command by directly observing either the teacher or other students performing the actions. This allows them to connect the words they hear to the actions being demonstrated. Once students grasp the meaning of the command through repeated observation and practice, the teacher begins issuing new combination of familiar words. For example, after learning command like sit and jump, the teachers might give a new instructions like jump and sit. This variation helps students apply their knowledge in different contexts, encouraging deeper understanding without overwhelming them to entirely new vocabulary. Instructor limits the numbers of new vocabulary items given to the students at any one time. This helps students differentiate the new words from those previously learned and to facilitate integration with their existing language knowledge. In total, physical response lessons, teachers carefully limit the new number of vocabulary words introduced at any given time. This is done to help students clearly differentiate the new words from those they have already learned by introducing a manageable number of new terms. Students can better focus on understanding and practicing them without any confusion. This gradual approach also makes it easier for students to integrate and the new vocabulary into their existing knowledge. They can more effectively connect new words with familiar ones, reinforcing both and new, previously learned language, leading to a more solid and integral understanding. Use of commands in the imperative mood. The teacher primarily gives instructions in a form of command. For example, stand up or touch your head. These commands are phrased to imperative mood, meaning they are direct requests or order to do something. To use the imperative commands is essential in TPR because it encourages intimidate actions. Students respond physically to those commands rather than verbally, which helps them to imitate the language through movements. This direct approach creates an engaging and interactive learning environment, making it easier for the students to grasp the meaning of the command through actions. Students respond physically. Instead of responding verbally at first, students allowed the command by physically performing the actions. For example, when the teacher says jump, the students may jump. This connects the meaning of the word to a physical activity, helping students learning through actions. By learning through actions, students engage more actively in the learning process. This method reinforces the understanding of the vocabulary and helps them remember the meaning of the words more effectively. The physical activity makes the learning experience dynamic and enjoyable, allowing students to internalize the language in a natural and intuitive way. Learning by observation. At the start, students may not know the meaning of the commands. They learn the meaning by observing what the teacher or the other students are doing in response to the command. It helps them associate the words with actions. By associating the words with action through observation, students gradually begin to comprehend the meaning of the commands. This process not only aids the vocabulary acquisition, but also makes the learning experience more engaging as the students actively participate in the lesson by watching and eventually imitating the actions. Progressive learning and new combination. After students understand the basic vocabulary through observation and physical actions, the teacher starts combining familiar words in new different ways. For example, after learning sit down or stand up, the teacher might say stand up and touch your head, which encourages students to process and follow more complex instructions. By progressively increasing the complexity of the command, students develop their language skills and more effectively. They learn to think critically about the instruction, improving their comprehension and boosting their confidence as they successfully follow more challenging tasks. Limiting new vocabulary. To avoid overwhelming students, teacher introduce only a few new vocabulary words at a time. This allows students to focus on learning new words while reinforcing previous learned vocabulary. By keeping the number of new small words, Students can focus on understanding and practicing each term more thoroughly. These methods not only helps them to learn new vocabulary, but also provides an opportunity to reinforce the vocabulary they have already learned.
So now let's move on to the roles of instructional materials, teachers, and learners in total physical response. So first, let's tackle what is the role of instructional material. So for absolute beginners, lessons may not require the use of materials, but later on, the teacher may use common classroom objects, and as the course develops, the teacher will need to make or collect supporting materials to support teaching points. So, in total physical response, instructional materials play a supportive role, enhancing but not centralizing the method. Total physical response, developed by James Asher, focuses on language learning through listening and physical movement. So, instructional materials reinforce commands, contextualize learning, aid vocabulary development, and foster interaction, helping learners to better associate language with actions and objects. Although total physical response emphasizes teacher-student interaction, materials enhance the learning experience by making it more concrete and immersive. So now let's tackle about the learners. What are the roles of the learners? So the roles of the learners is to have the primary roles of listener and performer. Second, they listen attentively and respond physically to commands given by the teacher. And lastly, learners are also expected to recognize and respond to novel combinations of previously taught items. So, in total physical response, learners take on active roles, focusing on understanding and physically responding to the teacher's commands. They begin as listeners and performers, responding with action, and may first act as observers by watching others. So, as they gain confidence, learners become responders directly following commands and later may progress to speakers, giving commands themselves. So, total physical response emphasizes physical responses before verbal ones, reducing stress and making learning more engaging. So now let's move on to the roles of the teachers. So, what are the teachers' role, by the way? So, the instructor or the teacher is the director of a stage play in which the students are the actors. Is that it is the teacher who decides what to teach, who models and presents the new materials, and who selects supporting materials for classroom use. Also, the teacher usually initiates the interaction between learners. So, in total physical response, the teacher plays a central role, guiding students with commands and actions. They act as a director, leading the lesson, and as a model, demonstrating actions for learners to mimic. And also, it is a facilitator in which the teacher creates a low stress environment to build learner confidence, while also serving as a monitor and assessor to evaluate students' understanding. So, initially, the sole speaker, the teacher gradually encourages students to take speaking roles as their comprehension improves.